Hello, class. I wanted to talk to you about analyzing a poem, and specifically, we're going to look at the poetry of Phillis Wheatley. Since Phillis Wheatley's poetry is more complicated, I feel, than most other poets, not only of her era, but also almost any time. I feel that her work is a nice place to start because we'll talk about the analysis of poetry in various ways throughout the class. But the skills that we use for Phillis Wheatley will be easily transferred over to other poets as we work through the Romantic era. So let's talk about a poem. So I chose one poem in particular first. The first poem that I wanted to talk about, or the one poem I'm going to talk about here, is Ode to Neptune. So if you have your book, and using this book here, it's on page 41. So I'm going to read from the book, but I'll go ahead and screen share this so you can see it as well. Hold on. All right, and this is Phillis Wheatley's Ode to Neptune. Ode to Neptune on Mrs. W's voyage to England. 1. While raging tempests shake the shore, while Aeolus thunders round us roar, and sweep impetuous o'er the plain, be still, O tyrant of the main, nor let thy brow contracted frowns betray, while my Susanna skims the watery way. 2. The power propitious, here is the lay, the blue-eyed daughters of the sea, with sweeter cadence glide along, and Thames responsive joins the song. Pleased with their notes, soul shed benign his ray, and double radiance decks the face of day. 3. To court thee to Britannia's arms, serene the climes and mild the sky, her region boasts outnumbered charms, thy welcome smiles in every eye. Thy promise, Neptune, keep, record my prayer, nor give my wishes to the empty air. Boston, October 10th, 1772. So we look at the poem first for what it is. So as it's been said many times, what you should do with a poem is you should read it first, read it again, and then read it one more time. What I would encourage you to do is to read the poems out loud. If you read the poetry out loud, you have a better chance of hearing it. You get to hear the cadence, you get to hear where the rhyme scheme is in the poem. Some of her work is a little tricky, and sometimes, as we'll find with a lot of this older poetry, that the words that look like they rhyme might not rhyme. And sometimes, I'm not sure if it's because of the accents or if it's just a word play, but at any rate, you'll notice that when you're doing your readings. And so read the poem to yourself at least 3 times before you begin the analysis. That helps you get a better idea of what the poem itself is about. So I'm not going to do that here. I'll just let you do that on your own. So once we've done that, you take a look at the poem and the few things that stand out to you. 1, it's a title. So an ode to Neptune. So in this, we look at Neptune. Who is Neptune? That would be one of the first things you look up. If you're not familiar with the Roman gods, this is one of the gods that is, the god of the sea, of course, Poseidon. So it's also known as Neptune, Poseidon, Greco-Roman mythology. Then we see the next line, on Mrs. W's voyage to England. She had a tendency, like many poets of her time, to leave out the last name. And it's interesting because, of course, she mentions the first name in the poem itself, where we see in the very last line in the first stanza, line 6, while my Susanna skims the watery way, which is right there. So we know Susanna, and then we also know Susanna Wheatley was the woman who owned her, the mistress of the house. So legally owned her. And so we see this in this poem essentially to Miss Wheatley as she's going over to England. Also, pay attention to this. Boston, October 10th, 1772. So this would lead you to wonder what was happening in 1772. Take a look at the book and look through her other poems and see the numerous poems that she has and find a date attached to any of them. And just a quick skim of the text itself show me that dates are fairly absent in her work. So why is that significant? Why did she choose that day? What was going on at that time? Is we discussed in class, the Somerset ruling, the Somerset case, the Mansfield case is also what it's called, was taking place at the same time. This is a poem that she wrote in Boston. She's published often in the newspapers in Boston and was becoming very well known in the city. It's almost impossible to think that she didn't know what was happening in England in 1772 related to slavery. As an enslaved Black woman in the Americas, if she was paying attention to what was happening, then she surely knew that she had a lot at stake in what was going on, and more than likely saw the poetry that she was creating as her possible key to freedom. So what is happening in that period? What is she thinking about? So these are some of the things that you want to pose. You want to look in the background. This doesn't give us a total answer key to her poetry, and I want you to look into it, but I don't want you to always mean that this is the answer. So just because it's happening in 1772 doesn't necessarily mean it's connected to the Somerset case, but it's interesting that it's happening there. So what's going on with that? And this is also the time when she's trying to get her book published. So she probably has a lot at stake in the voyages of Susanna Wheatley. If the ship went down, how would her life change? If the ship made it to England, and what is she also praying? She praying just for a safe voyage, or is she praying for something more beneficial to her, maybe something related to her book? So there's many things that are happening at that time that are worth paying attention to, worth noting. Also, on a side note, if you remember, when we're reading Henry Louis Gates, we talked about the critiques that people gave her poem On Being Brought to Africa. We have the famous line at the beginning of the poem, On Being Brought from Africa, where she discusses, "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my benighted soul to understand." So first, remember that she wrote that poem when she was 14 years old, so roughly around 14 years old. And for that to be her most anthologized, her most well-read poem, her most arguably misunderstood poem is important, and on one more small side note, think about this and imagine you being Phillis Wheatley, and imagine the poetry that you wrote when you were 14 years old and have that be the poem that lasts for eternity. So we're allowed to change our mind. So whatever she meant in the poem, it's hard to really say. We can look at that we could say with a number of different interpretations, all the different possibilities, but these are some. But I want to bring up those lines there where she says, "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land." If you notice in this poem right here, and I'll highlight this word, Neptune. Neptune is a pagan god. So while she's saying that it's mercy that brought her from her pagan land, we see this poem written to a god, a pagan god from Greco-Roman mythology. Something surely that she was aware of as she's working on these poems. So even though she wrote On Being Brought from Africa to America when she was 14 years old, she did publish it, and she chose to publish it. She had the knowledge of what she was publishing, so we can make of that what we want. So at any rate, so we go through the poem and we look up the words that we might not know. So I scribbled down a couple words that I thought might be words that you might not know. So one was tempests. So what are tempests? Tempests are storms, usually violent storms. So the Tempest, you think of the play, The Tempest by Shakespeare. Tempests are storms, violent storms. So look that up, look up those words. Aeolus is the god of the wind. It's also the son of Poseidon. So the god of the wind, the son of Poseidon. So we have these lines here, while Aeolus thunders round us roar and sweep the impetuous over the plain. Impetuous, what does that mean? It's acting acting or done without thought or care, moving rapidly, fervently. So these are some of the things that, if you didn't know the words, now you know. And the main can be seen as the high seas. So looking at this, while raging tempests shake the shore, while Aeolus thunders around us roar, and sweep impetuous o'er the plain, be still, O tyrant of the main, nor let thy brow contracted frowns betray, while my Susanna skims the watery way. So we look at this and we try to wonder, what is she saying in here? We'll come to that in a second. So we go down a couple lines and we see the power propitious, here's the lay. When we talked about some of her poems, specifically Hymn to the Morning, one of the things we talked about was lay. So what does lay mean? Lay means a song. So propitious, here, the power, propitious, here's the lay. And propitious means favorably dispossessed, favorably favored towards someone. Favorably feelings, good feelings towards someone, good character, success. So these are some of the definitions here. The power, propitious, here's the lay. And the blue-eyed daughter of the sea, the sweeter cadence glide along, and Thames responsive joins the song. Pleased with their notes, soul means the sun, sheds benign his ray, and double radiance decks the day. And if you remember, decks also means decorations, like deck the halls with boughs of holly from the song. 3, the court, to court thee to Britannia's arms. Britannia is a personified version of Britain, but of course it's Britain. Court thee to Britannia's arms, serene the climes and mild the sky. Climes, place with preferred climate, good climate. Serene the climes and mild the sky. Her region boasts outnumbered charms. Thy welcome smiles in every eye. Thy promise, Neptune, record my prayer, nor give my wishes to the empty air. So the promise, Neptune, keep, record my prayer, nor give wishes to the empty air. So what I did was, in my notebook, I wrote down some of the words, what they meant, and then I also wrote, can't see this, so I'll screen share it, but it is a synopsis of the poem. So I'll leave it up here and then I'll just read some of my notes. This is just quick notes, but this is what you need to do. This is a 3-part poem which calls on Neptune, the god of the sea, Poseidon, to calm the seas as Susanna Wheatley crosses. She being Phillis Wheatley, calls on the power to hear her poem as the river Thames meets the sea, and Thames, of course, the major river in England, London, meets the sea. She begs the weather to agree with Neptune to allow an easy voyage. Britain is personified as Britannia, as calm, gentle, with unwavering on her climbs. The people will welcome her with open arms if Neptune listens to her prayer and keeps his word. And this is written again in the same year that made possible in England the Somerset decision, which effectively ended slavery. Of course, it didn't quite end slavery in England, but it's effectively brought about that end. So we see the synopsis of the poem. So what does the poem mean? Yeah, how do we look at that deeper? I'll just add this one other thing in here too. So I share the screen, get out of the stop share mode. Right. You can barely see this. Maybe the camera will focus, but this is a picture that my daughter drew of it. She was reading a lot of Percy Jackson at the time, and I thought it'd be cute to add a little drawing of this. I had her read the poem and give me a visual synopsis of it. You see the waves there. You see Poseidon, and it says, or Neptune. Whoa there. Whoa there, fellers. Anyway, I'll leave that out. But I just wanted to show you some of the ways that I did this. Okay, you of course can do this in other ways. But what's helpful for me is if I read the poem 3 times. So that's my analysis. Read the poem 3 times, and after I've read the poem, then I write down all the words that I might not know the definition, or might have multiple definitions too. If a sentence doesn't quite make sense when I'm reading it, then look up multiple definitions. A lot of these words have various definitions, and Wheatley was by all regards, a genius. So surely she knew multiple definitions of the words. And also keep in mind too that Wheatley's state is important with her poetry. And I argue that it's different than with a lot of other poets. Many other poets, when we see their works, we might not always dig into their background, might not always dig into their biography. But with Wheatley, she is, as the phrase goes, and I use this phrase a lot, she's speaking truth to power. So she knows that if she's getting this book published, as Henry Louis Gates had pointed out, she can't bring the revolution into the book. So, and she also knows that people are constantly going to be reading over the works that she has written to try and find reasons not to have her book published. So in that way, that she's probably coding a lot of things. She's writing things in various ways, and she's trying to get a message across. And I say that personally because I know, as a poet myself, that when you write poetry, that you're trying your best to speak from your heart. And to imagine what it would be like to be Phillis Wheatley, who is roughly your age. She's roughly in her late teens, and as she's putting these works together, she has this one strong possibility of becoming free, and that possibility is with her poetry. So what is the best way to get her work out? What is the best way to get her work published? And then also to be true to herself as a poet, because an artist ultimately has that responsibility to be true to herself. So in this instance, this is what Phillis Wheatley is trying to do, is I imagine, is trying to be true to herself. So look at that and look for other possible meanings of the poem too. Why would she want Susanna Wheatley to make it to England safely? What would be the reasons, and why would she offer this prayer to Neptune versus just a simple prayer to Jesus or a prayer to the Christian God? Why would she do this? Why would she offer that instead? What is the cultural environment that she's in? What are her influences? Those kind of things. So look at this when you're looking at the analysis. I give you one, so don't use that one poem, but look at some of the others, unless you have a totally different interpretation of the poem. What's good and bad about Phillis Wheatley's work is that she didn't give an answer key to it. There aren't asterisks or footnotes at the bottom of the poems that she wrote where she tells us exactly what she's looking for. You might be able to find some hints though if you look in the back of this book and you go to the letters, because that might help you out a little bit too. But researching her is good to be able to understand the poems, but it helps to give you the analysis. So again, the first step is to read the poem, not once, not twice, but thrice. Once you've done that, go through the poem, find the words that you don't know, understand them, and try to translate those different sections into your own English. And then once you've done that, write up a synopsis of the poem. What is the poem about, and what does the poem mean? What is her purpose? What is her argument or thesis, if you can detect that in there? And analyzing poetry isn't the easiest thing in the world, and Phillis Wheatley is one of the most complicated poets that I've read. So try your best with that and see how it goes. I promise you it'll be beneficial in your analysis of other poetry, and it'll be a helpful tool that you could use in various ways for this class and also future classes. All right, so thank you very much, and I am available for any questions if you have any.